Jax's abstraction split the fandom in half. Some people thought it was the perfect ending for his character, while others hated it. The reaction was made even stronger by the fact that the entire finale had already been leaked online, meaning people were dissecting clips, forming theories, and judging scenes completely out of context before the episode was even officially released. By the time people actually watched the finale, they had already decided what Jax's ending was supposed to be. So why did his ending make people this angry? Of course, I also need to mention that this video will contain major spoilers for The Amazing Digital Circus, as well as I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. There will also be discussions of triggering topics such as abuse, expiry, psychological distress, and other potentially disturbing subjects that might be uncomfortable or triggering for some viewers. So, viewer discretion is advised. A lot of viewers were frustrated with the finale for focusing so heavily on Jax instead of spending more time exploring the other characters or resolving their individual issues. And honestly, I completely disagree with that criticism. I think focusing on Jax was probably one of the best decisions Gooseworks could have made, because he is clearly a character she has put an enormous amount of thought into, and not only because he is her self-proclaimed self-insert. From the beginning, Jax has served as the contrarian of the group. He constantly challenges everyone's beliefs, refuses to accept the explanations they have settled on, and seems almost incapable of taking the circus seriously. While the other characters gradually develop ways of coping with their situation, Jax questions whether any of it matters at all. He starts viewing the people around him less as individuals and more as roles, archetypes, or NPCs, and this becomes increasingly important after Ribbit and Kaufmo abstract. As more people abstract and the circus continues to prove that there is no obvious way out, Jax's detachment becomes more extreme. If the circus isn't real, then perhaps the people inside it aren't really people either. By reducing everyone around him to characters playing predetermined roles, Jax can distance himself from the possibility of actually caring about them. If they aren't real, losing them cannot hurt him. If their feelings don't matter, then neither do the consequences of hurting them. This is why I think Jax is much more interesting than simply being the asshole of the group. His cruelty can be understood as part of the way he protects himself from emotional attachment. There's also strange contradiction in the way he behaves. Jax constantly creates reasons for people to react to him. He insults them, annoys them, challenges them, and deliberately pushes their buttons. Even negative attention still proves that people are paying attention to him. He can maintain a connection to everyone around him without even having to admit that he actually wants one. And eventually, that coping mechanism starts working too well. The more Jax convinces everyone that he doesn't want their kindness, concern, or help, the less likely they are to offer it. He spent so long making himself impossible to reach that eventually the others learn to stop reaching. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when discussing Jax is treating everything he says as a completely honest representation of what he actually believes. Jax is almost always performing. He has a tendency to turn anything that gets too personal into something he can control. He jokes when things become uncomfortable, becomes hostile when people get too close, and redirects serious conversations whenever he doesn't want to answer them. Even when he allows himself to become vulnerable, he usually finds a way to put the walls back up. But this is also where a lot of audiences' hatred for Jax comes from, and honestly, I understand it. Jax isn't simply pretending to be an asshole. He genuinely hurts people, deliberately targets their insecurities, and sometimes clearly enjoys having power over them. Gangle in particular becomes one of his favorite targets. Understanding why someone behaves badly doesn't mean excusing it, and I don't think Jax becomes more interesting if every cruel thing he does is reinterpreted as some hidden expression of affection. What makes him interesting is that this behavior gives him a consistent identity within the group. Everyone knows what to expect from Jax, and nobody expects him to suddenly become vulnerable. His cruelty becomes part of the character he presents to everyone else, making it harder for everyone to see what might actually be underneath. And I think this is a major reason why so many people disliked the finale focusing so heavy on him. After spending the entire series watching Jax bully and antagonize characters they actually cared about, some viewers understandably didn't want his suffering to become the emotional centerpiece of the ending. But I think that discomfort is exactly what makes this ending interesting. The finale doesn't tell us Jax was secretly a good person all along, nor does it erase what he actually has done. Instead, it takes the personality he has spent the entire series building and shows us what happens when that defense finally stops working. And that is where Jax's abstraction becomes so important. This is where I think the parallels between The Amazing Turtle Circus and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream become particularly interesting. In the I Have No Mouth, one of the protagonists, Ted, is the narrator and one of the survivors trapped by AI called AM. He is paranoid, cynical, and deeply distrustful of the people around him, often assuming there is another motive behind their actions. His hostility becomes a way of protecting himself from vulnerability, because trusting other people also means giving them the ability to hurt him. Jax occupies a surprisingly similar position. He antagonizes the other characters, distrusts Ragatha's kindness, mocks Gangle's vulnerability, and constantly presents himself as someone who doesn't care about anyone. But the important similarity isn't simply their cruelty. It is what that cruelty protects them from. Ted assumes people are dangerous, while Jax seems to cope by deciding that emotional attachment isn't worth having. Ted responds with paranoia, Jax with detachment, but both create distance between themselves and everyone around them. This is why I don't think Jax is simply Ted copied into another story. He feels more like a variation of the same tragedy. Ted believes nobody can be trusted, while Jax convinces himself that nobody matters enough to trust in the first place. Both characters use that belief to protect themselves, and both eventually become isolated by it. This is also why Ragatha becomes such an important character when looking at Jax through this lens. She represents almost exactly the kind of person he should want around him. She tries to keep the group together, offers emotional support, and continues showing kindness even while the circus constantly puts everyone through hell. Jax, however, has a difficult time accepting any of it. Her kindness gives him something he spends most of the series trying to avoid, the possibility that someone might genuinely care about him. There are also some interesting parallels between Ragatha and Ellen from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Both try to maintain some sense of kindness and humanity despite being trapped in environments that constantly destroy both. Ted and Ellen, meanwhile, represent very different ways of coping with the same horrific situation. Ellen continues seeking connection and intimacy, while Ted is much more guarded and distrustful. Ragatha and Jax have a similar dynamic. She keeps reaching toward him, while he responds by putting more distance between them. Accepting Ragatha's kindness would mean admitting that Jax can be lonely, that other people matter to him, and that other opinions can actually affect him. All of that goes against the identity he has built around not caring. This is where psychological research around social connection becomes relevant. The interpersonal theory of expiry describes thwarted belongingness, the feeling that you don't truly belong or meaningful connections with other people are unavailable alongside perceived burdensomeness, the belief that you are burdened to other people. Research has found associations between these experiences and thoughts about expiry, although the relationship is much more complicated than saying that one causes the other. We obviously can't diagnose Jax or claim that these studies explain his behavior, they simply give us a useful framework for understanding the contradiction at the center of his character. Jax is surrounded by people while at the same time he keeps himself outside of the group. Jax's relationship with Gangle deserves more attention because I don't think he targets her simply because she's an easy victim. Gangle is vulnerable, emotional, and visibly affected by what happens around her, but there is a more uncomfortable interpretation of their relationship. She can be seen as a mirror of the part of Jax that he desperately refuses to acknowledge. Gangle literally wears masks while Jax has built one of his entire personality. Her comedy mask lets her present herself as happier and more confident that she really feels, while Jax uses jokes, cruelty, and sarcasm to create the impression that nothing can hurt him. The difference is that Gangle's mask keeps breaking. Her emotions are difficult to hide, while Jax immediately covers anything uncomfortable with another joke or attack. Gangle openly displays things Jax spends his life suppressing. She wants people to like her, gets hurt by rejection, and clearly needs other people. Jax has built his identity around pretending he doesn't need anyone, so her vulnerability may remind him of something he refuses to see in himself. By treating Gangle vulnerability as pathetic, Jax can distance himself from his own. Gangle's mask is visible, while Jax's isn't. This is also why I think Pomni is such an important character when looking at Jax's behavior. On the surface, they seem like complete opposites, but that difference may be exactly what makes Pomni interesting to him. Unlike everyone else, she enters the circus without an established idea of who Jax is supposed to be. She has no history with him and no reason to see him through the same lens as the others, so she has to figure him out for herself. That gives Jax something that others can't. He still has control over how Pomni sees him because there are no years of resentment or expectations standing between them. She simply meets him as he is, which may explain why he sometimes can seem more comfortable around her. But Pomni also represents something Jax has gradually lost. She's still capable of looking at the circus and recognizing how wrong everything is. She questions it, fears it, and desperately wants to understand what happened to her. Jax has adapted by becoming detached from the situation, while Pomni starts adapting by finding meaning in the people around her. To Jax, the circus being fake makes everything inside it feel meaningless. Pomni gradually reaches the opposite conclusion. Even if the world itself isn't real in the way she wants it to be, the relationship she forms inside it can still be real to her. That makes Pomni's attempt to reach Jax after his abstraction especially important. She hasn't spent years accepting the version of Jax that everyone else has become accustomed to. She can still look at him without seeing only the asshole he has presented himself as. In a way, Pomni is one of the last people who can look at Jax without already knowing who he is supposed to be. This brings us to another part of Jax's character that I think becomes much more important after the finale. His relationship with his mother and this idea of trying to become someone who is worthy of being loved. The scene where Jax opens to Ribbit about his family and the secret he has been keeping wasn't something I personally interpreted as being specifically about gender when I first watched it. What stood out to me was Jax finally allowing himself to be vulnerable with someone he trusted. He talks about his relationship with his parents and the way his mother treated him, and Ribbit responds with genuine understanding instead of judging him. When she puts her bow on his head and tells him his secret is safe with her, I saw it more as a small gesture of comfort during a moment where Jax was clearly uncomfortable with being emotionally exposed. The interpretation changed after people began compiling the different hints throughout the series, and Gooseworks eventually confirmed the transgender interpretation through her own posts. She also referred to Jax as a boy mother, which is a term I personally had never heard before. I had to see other people explain the context before I understood what they were pointing out, so I don't want to pretend I picked up on all of it when I first watched the scene. At the same time, I don't think that later confirmation makes my original interpretation irrelevant. The scene can be about Jax's relationship with his mother, his trust in Ribbit, his fear of vulnerability, and his gender identity all at once. They all feed into a much larger question surrounding his character. What version of myself do I need to become for somebody to love me? As a younger self, Jax seems desperate to find a version of himself that his mother will accept. Later, he goes in almost the opposite direction and and constructs a personality that makes rejection easier to deal with. He becomes the asshole before anyone can decide that he is one. He hides how much he cares, making it easier to dismiss the people who leave him. He builds his entire identity around not needing anyone because needing someone also means giving them the power to hurt him. His gender identity doesn't explain his cruelty, and I don't think you should be treated as some hidden reason why he behaves the way he does. Instead, it adds another layer to the largest struggle at the center of Jax's character. Figuring out who he actually is while being terrified that the person underneath everything might not be someone that other people could love. That brings us to the part of the finale that made the most people annoyed. A lot of viewers were frustrated by how early this happens, especially because Pomni and the others don't immediately get a chance to reach him. Some wanted Jax to be saved, others wanted a final conversation where everyone could finally tell him that they cared, and some felt that the story owed him a proper redemption before his story could end. At the same time, I think that the lack of the resolution is exactly what makes the ending work. Abstraction is the digital circus' closest equivalent to expiry, so having Jax return to normal after Pomni reaches him would completely change what the scene is trying to say. Pomni entering his mind creates the possibility for a moment. She finally sees the vulnerable side of Jax that he has spent so long hiding, and for a second, it feels like this might be the moment where everything changes. Instead, he remains abstracted. I think that expectation of a rescue is what makes the finale so uncomfortable. After spending so much time watching Jax become increasingly isolated, we naturally expect the story to give us that big emotional moment where someone finally understands him. Fiction does this constantly. Someone notices what is happening, says the right thing, the character finally opens up, and there is still time to change the outcome. How happy. The finale refuses to give us that. Jax's abstraction happens entirely away from other characters. We don't watch him reach that point, we don't see everyone rush in to stop it, and we don't get a final conversation where he explains what he has been feeling. We simply learn what happened afterwards. Even when Pomni reaches him inside his mind, she's dealing with what has already happened rather than preventing it. That quietness is important because real crises don't always look the same way fiction teaches us to expect them to. Someone can be struggling without the people around them understanding how serious things have become. They might withdraw, become unusually angry or hopeless, behave differently from normal, or stop communicating in the same way. These can be warning signs, but there is no universal checklist or single way for someone in crisis to behave. Jax's situation is even more uncomfortable because he has spent years teaching everyone around him not to look too closely. He rejects their concern, turns serious moments into jokes, and repeatedly tells them he wants to be left alone. Eventually, the others believe him. From their perspective, giving Jax space can look like respecting his wishes rather than abandoning him. The audience, however, is given information they don't have. We can see the struggle underneath his behavior, while other characters have learned to accept it as simply Jax being Jax. This is where the idea of thwarted belongingness comes relevant. Jax wants connection while simultaneously making himself increasingly difficult to reach. He's pushing people away, they eventually stop trying, and that distance then becomes evidence that they never cared about him. That shouldn't be interpreted as blaming someone for their own suffering. People in distress can struggle to communicate what they actually need, and pushing others away doesn't make their suffering their fault. But within Jax's story, that contradiction is central to his tragedy. He wanted to make sure nobody could get close enough to hurt him. Eventually, nobody was close enough to reach him. And that's why I think Gooseworks' decision to keep Jax's abstraction so quiet is one of the strongest choices in the finale. There is no dramatic moment where everyone suddenly understands him. No final speech explains everything. No group intervention arrives at the exactly right moment. Instead, the characters are left with something much harder. They only begin to understand how serious Jax's situation was after they can no longer change what happened. Pomni finally sees the person underneath his defenses, but she sees him too late. The other are left to reconsider years of behavior that they had learned to accept as simply Jax being Jax, and Jax, who spent so much of his life convincing everyone that he wanted to be left alone, ultimately gets exactly that. There is no closure. There is only aftermath. This also helps explain why the finale created such a strong reaction. Some viewers wanted Jax to receive a redemption arc, others wanted the group to have one final opportunity to reach him, while some expected Pomni's journey through his mind to lead to his restoration. There were also people who simply disliked Jax enough to be satisfied with him being gone, arguing that the circus was better without someone who had caused so much misery for others. Those reactions make sense because Jax is difficult to separate from his actions. Understanding why he behaves that way doesn't make those actions harmless, but he also isn't simply an asshole with nothing underneath him. That contradiction is what makes the ending so divisive. Some viewers were looking for a redemption story where Jax finally acknowledges the damage he has caused and allows the others to reach him. Instead, the finale ends his story before he can receive the emotional resolution we have been trained to expect. Jax's abstraction works as the culmination of his character rather than as simply a shocking twist. The more convincing that performance becomes, the harder it is for anyone to recognize when it stops being a performance. That is what ties the different parts of his character: his relationship with his mother, his vulnerability with Ribbit, his gender identity, his treatment of Gangle, his distrust of Ragatha, and his connection with Pomni all point back to the same problem. Jax desperately wants connection, but everything he does is designed to protect him from needing it. He wants to be loved, but doesn't trust love. He wants people to stay, but constantly gives them reasons to leave. And I think this is the real tragedy of Jax. The tragedy is that underneath all of it was someone who wanted to be loved, but became so afraid of vulnerability that he spent years making himself impossible to reach. The same walls that protected him also kept anyone else from reaching him. Jax's story was never really about whether he deserved to be saved. It was about whether he could ever allow himself to be seen.